What? Yeah. Give me a second. I gotta drink some water here.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Welcome. You are entering into a strange dimension. A dimension where narratives from across space and time come together. Narratives that could have, might have, or should have been all exist here in one space. This is CineMasters Ultimate Timeline.
Welcome back to CineMasters. This is the show where we normally watch a movie and then pitch it back to one another. I'm joined today by Alessa.
Hello.
And of course, my name is Janglez the Strange. And today we are finishing up our 4-part series on the Divergent series movies. So
Yes.
if you haven't been following along, we've been watching all of the Divergent movies and then pitching those movies back to one another. And then every time we've watched the sequel to that, the next movie, we've had to base our pitches on not only the movie's material as a source material, but also make sure that it flows with the pitches we've had in the past. And so today we are finally on the very last movie, which was set to be called Ascendant, or if you want to call it Allegiant Part 2, I guess. That's fine too. But this is a movie that never came out, and we are finishing our 4-part pitch series with a movie that never came out. So this is a first.
Yes.
We've never done a CineMasters episode where there's been no source material. And also we're finishing our first ever CineMasters series. So pretty excited about that. Yeah. I guess we'll start, because there's no movie to talk about, so we'll start with talking about our pitches. So I've got a couple questions lined up. My first question for you, Alessa, is how did you find, I guess we'll start really vague, the whole Divergent series as a whole, like the movie franchise? What did you think?
I didn't like it. I liked it as, like, just a entertaining movie to watch with some pretty visuals, I guess.
The visuals were always pretty stunning, yeah.
Yeah.
And do you have a favorite movie of the trilogy?
Probably, in terms of storytelling, maybe the first, but in terms of visuals, the second.
I actually think the second is my favorite. I don't know that I would say that I particularly enjoyed this series. I think there are young adult movies and books, for that matter, that do a lot of what this is trying to say, but better.
Yes, they do.
And I think the second movie is, for me, was really where this came together. Like, I was like, here are my thoughts. And but I will say, like, I enjoyed the pitch writing process. Mm-hmm. Like, and I will say that the themes that I came up with and followed through for the whole series, I do think were inspired by what was happening in the movie. So it's not as though there wasn't thought put into this. I just think there was some loose ends. And of course, that doesn't necessarily reflect Veronica Roth. That could also reflect the studio, the writers, the script. Like, there's many parts to making a movie. And we're not trying to disparage that movie at all. We're just trying to say, like, what would we do differently?
Yeah.
Yeah. So now comes the question of, we only got 3 of the 4 planned movies, right?
Yeah.
Do you think that this series would have benefited from its conclusion happening?
Yes. But I don't think it needed to be in a 4th movie. I think that if they had just used their time a little bit better, then they could have made it fit into a 3rd movie. I don't remember what the conclusion was in the books, so I don't know if there was a whole lot that we aren't getting, but I do know that the ending that I have planned out really wouldn't have taken that long if I could squish it into the 3rd movie.
I probably could have made mine into the 3rd movie as well, but I'm kind of glad I had a whole movie to explore the themes that I was going with.
Yeah.
It did give me a chance to do something really, really neat that I think could have, really benefited from having the time of the 4th movie, but it gave me a chance to do something really, really neat visually. Like, in my head, I had this visual idea that would have panned out really well. And I don't know if that would have worked in a 3rd movie.
Right.
just because of how things were happening in the third movie versus the second and first. Yeah. Okay. Then in terms on the writing side, just covering all our bases here. In terms of the writing side, we had to write pitches based on both our movies and our previous pitches. Which movie do you think was the easiest to write? Which pitch was the easiest to write?
I think... Okay, so you know that I wrote, I think, one of my pitches at like 2 o'clock in the morning.
I did not know that.
I'm pretty sure I told you.
Sorry. I thought you were saying this pitch. Yeah, you definitely did tell me you wrote it like 2 o'clock in the morning, the day before we were about to record.
Yeah, it was... What movie was it?
It was either 2 or 3.
One, Insurgent.
Yeah.
And surprisingly, I think I would say that one was the easiest because I knew what I wanted to do with it, and I already had more source material to work from because I was stealing from the first movie a bit.
Oh yeah, because you cut yours off. You cut your first pitch off slightly. Short. If I hadn't given myself that extra space, I would have been really like digging it. Like I wouldn't have had enough to work off of because the second movie was fairly empty of good things. I thought the second movie actually had the best theming. I said this before, but the whole idea of Beatrice forgiving herself, I think, and forgiving others, I think was exceptionally well done throughout that movie because we had like the different, like, so she has the truth serum at Candor, and then she has like the passage in order to open the box at the end of the movie. Like those were, I think, fairly well done. In terms of like the theme of Beatrice forgiving herself and forgiving others. But I will say that and you brought this up, that the second movie has almost no 4 in it. Like he doesn't matter. And the second movie also, Beatrice doesn't feel like the same person. And then when we watched the third movie, I was like, oh, now she's back to being the first movie Beatrice. Yeah. It feels weird.
It was very strange and hard to... I don't want to say it was like hard to enjoy, because it was still like at some point I was like, oh, that was a good, scene or something, but it felt empty to me. And the fact that, like I said, the second movie was very like focused on Triss and everything was about Triss, and the first movie was kind of like that, but the second movie took it to a whole new level. And the whole time I was sitting there going, yep, okay, this is really predictable. Great. Good job. I know exactly what's happening. And it's not just because I read the books. Like, everything is laid plainly out.
Yeah, it's pretty straightforward. You can see what all is going to happen right there.
Yeah.
The other thing that I found that was really jarring was the first movie is told from Beatrice's perspective, but we get a lot of 4. And the second movie is almost devoid of 4 as a character. Like, there's no real growth, and he doesn't really do a lot, which is very jarring because... In the third movie, we get a lot of the movie is from 4's perspective. In fact, I would say for large swaths of the movie, Beatrice is just removed. She's just working with David, whatever the fuck that means.
Yeah, they never really... We didn't talk about that, but they never really showed what they were doing. It was just they were running tests, and they had a fancy-looking hollow thing.
And they could go up the elevator, which other people who were broken weren't allowed to go up.
Yep.
Yeah. I will say that, so the big thing is in the third book, we start to get both Beatrice and Tobias's /4's narration in the book. And as soon as I started reading it, immediately I was like, Beatrice is going to die. Because there's no real reason to have your character or to have a new narrator start on your third book, which is also the end of the series. It was too much of a dead giveaway because it starts to tell me that there's a reason you need to have 2 stories being told, and that means that something or something big is going to happen to your main protagonist, Beatrice, which is frustrating because it doesn't necessarily mean she's going to die. It's just because it's a young adult novel. It was pretty easy to be like, I'm going to pick that up. That's what I'm picking up from this. There's other things you can do with 2 different viewpoints, especially if you like set your characters against each other, which they kind of did in the third movie. We kind of
They
had this
did,
point
yeah.
where, and it was like, oh, this is nice because now you're seeing two different viewpoints, especially if they're working towards the same thing. But I don't think this movie quite does that, where you have two characters who are clearly together but are working towards the same thing, but have very different views on how to achieve it. That can work out really well. But when you introduce that in the third book, which is the last book of 3 in a trilogy, it becomes really suspicious. And I know that Veronica Roth has gone back and done the first book, Divergent, from 4's perspective. I think the book is actually called 4. And that's great. Super great. But when it's not included in the original book, and then in the second one, it's a little suspect.
Yes.
It becomes like this is no longer different viewpoints. It's being done to serve the plot.
Yeah.
And again, that has its merits or non-merits. But I mean, so I guess that brings us to finally the big reveal. Beatrice is supposed to die at the end.
Yeah. I don't actually remember that happening.
Beatrice dies at the end of this book, or maybe towards the end, but not quite at the end. It's not the climax, but it is kind of the climax. She dies at the end, and it's this whole thing because she gives her life to like make sure that other people can be free. I'm paraphrasing because I don't quite remember. It's been a while. I finished reading it in like 2013. So it's this like big thing about her giving her life up, which kind of ticked me off. Actually. And it took me a long time to realize why it pissed me off until we started watching this, until we started this series. And then I finally figured it out. This is why it's pissing me off so much. The whole story of Beatrice being special, right? And being able to free other people because she's special, and being able to do all this stuff because she's different from other people, and then having her die at the end to try and like prove the point, right? It's a Christ allegory.
Yes.
She's literally a martyr. She dies for the thing, even though she's pure or perfect or whatever, like she's genetically pure and not broken. She like puts herself out there to like say that, oh no, we can all be pure and we can all be, or it doesn't matter if you're broken, we're all people. And so she like puts forward this idea of like freedoms for all men are equal, and then dies for her cause as a martyr would. And it's a Christ allegory. And I think that the reason that pisses me off is, as I've been saying this whole time, is we continue to focus on the fact that Beatrice is special. And it's sometimes things will happen to Beatrice or because of Beatrice, but only because she's special. She isn't really doing anything.
Yeah.
And I've said this before, and I'll say it again, because people often compare the two, but Katniss is exceptional in her like her ability to hunt and use a bow, and that is exceptional and maybe certainly a little unrealistic, but not impossible, but certainly maybe a little unrealistic, but she's not special. Katniss is actually like terribly aggressive and untrusting and kind of not a good person. But
she's a very flawed character, but that makes her super relatable, right?
Yeah, and because we get it all from her perspective, like in her head, most of the time, it's not even like this is what's happening. It's just because it's first person, it's like this is what Katniss is experiencing and how she sees it, whereas everybody else is like, nah, brah, that's not what happened at all. And you really feel that in when Suzanne Collin writes Katniss, and I do think there are some unrealistic things about Katniss, but she feels real. She's not special. She's exceptional in some ways and super flawed in other ways. And it makes me be like, yeah, this feels real. This feels good. And the reason that it works is because it's from her narrative perspective. But she's, back to my point, she's not special. Beatrice is constantly being singled out because she is different, divergent, and then we find out what divergent means, and we find out like 4 is not divergent. Beatrice is somehow pure, and this sets her apart. And sometimes in narration we come across something called like passive heroism versus active heroism, and passive heroism is when things happen to you rather than because of the actions you do. And I think that Beatrice is, in a lot of ways, has both. But in a lot of ways where it really frustrates me, she's a passive heroine.
Yes.
She isn't... Things happen to her because she's special.
Yeah. like, she goes to meet David because she's special.
Right. She gets...
And, like, sure, escaping Chicago to go meet the other people outside the wall, that's a little bit of the active, but, like, after that, it's all passive again.
Yeah, and then I was even willing to forgive some of the this specialness, this exceptionality, not exceptionality. Well, exceptionalism is the term used in philosophy. I was willing to forgive that a little bit when we found out there was other people who were divergent. But then in the second movie, we find out that Beatrice is even more divergent because she's 100%. And it's like, no. And then she's the only one who can open the box. And then she has to be the one that helps her meet David. And everyone's been watching her because she's going to be the end of this nightmare. She's genetically pure, and somehow this came about. And it's all about how special she is. And when she dies, it's like, oh no, she was the special one and she died. But it's just martyrdom. It's a Christ allegory. And I find that problematic because I think a much grander tale is when somebody gives their life for something they believe in and they weren't special.
Yeah.
Or in, I guess, because everybody's special in their own way is what I mean. Like, but isn't you know, I think there's something much more poetic when you say, like, they gave their life for something they believed in, but not because they were different than anybody else.
Yeah.
That's what I think. I don't know. Any of your thoughts?
I'm with you on
pissed
that.
you off?
It's just the fact that the one thing that really made me angry about this whole series was that I guess it plays off of yours, is it was just seeming that it was like oh my god, sentences are failing me. It's like, there's honestly no good way to say it. How do I...
Just say it bluntly then. Use your swears if you have to.
I don't even... It was like... The person... Okay, no. Triss... It was very, like, self-centered for Triss, is what I'm trying to say.
You mean narratively? Like, it was always
narratively.
Focused?
It was always focused on Triss, no matter what. Even in the third movie, Triss was very special, and so all these things happened, and everything revolved around, you know, her and David and figuring out things. And then, like, I just had a problem with the fact that the relationships weren't kept up with. And that
I think they did a better job of that in the third movie. Like, they certainly there was constantly felt like there was a time frame in terms of the city, Chicago, tearing itself apart between, like, Evelyn's faction and the not faction.
I mean, like, the more like intimate, like, relationships between friends and family members, and not just the connection between Four and Triss.
Yeah, I kind of get behind that. I think you're right, but I think on a broader scale, what bothered me about that was everything was centered around, like you said, Four and Triss. Whereas I think when you're dealing with sort of like an entire city, I think it would be interesting to see, like, sure, Beatrice can be your main character, but let's use her as a vehicle of exploring, like, how the city is falling apart, or what the different factions are doing, or because there's characters we met and then we don't really do anything with them. So what I mean by that is there's a character named Uriah, who is introduced in the second movie, and then winds up siding with Johanna in the third movie, and doesn't have a single speaking line in the entirety of the third movie. Like, he's just there, and you're like, cool, that's great, but what is this character's motivation? Who is this character? Like, you know what I mean? Like, what's the actual division between Johanna and Evelyn? Like, it seems to me like Evelyn is like, get rid of the factions, and Joanna's like, the factions worked and kept us safe. But that's not a great system, because we know the factions were a lie. They were set up that way. So I think it would have been better if it was like, why not have Joanna be like, we want the same things, but I want to do it peacefully, whereas you want to do it with, like, more of a tyrannical rule. Again, coming back to this idea of how people are ruled. I don't know.
There was a lot that was definitely lost, and, like, that's, I guess, why I prefer reading when it comes to, like, the method of getting my storytelling in, because, or not storytelling in, but, like, the method of consuming storytelling, because you can see like intentional things written in. So, you know, like there's seeing something happen is not quite the same as like reading and like getting the full meaning behind the words. So like if someone slammed a door, it could like I don't know.
No, I know. I don't know if I quite agree with that. And that's an interesting way to say it, because words can be interpreted in many different ways, right? Mm-hmm. In terms of like the single words connotation, but also context matters, right? But then also like, and Nate and I have a whole bonus cast on this. What you choose to show in frame is just as important as like how it's phrased, if we want to compare it that way, right?
Okay. Putting
something in frame means that you chose to not show the other things, right? So in that way, like, context matters. But also, like, I do know what you mean. Like, there's a difference in an art form in terms of how you say things. I just think there is more room for ambiguity in visual storytelling than there is in written storytelling. Potential ambiguity. Because there's still ambiguity that's mentioned.
And I guess my problem with this is more that it didn't seem quite as intentional, or it was like intentionally infuriating for some of the scenes where I was like, well, why is this happening? I can't think of any specifics right now, but it was kind of a frustrating movie to watch. Like, the movies were frustrating.
Yeah, I would agree with that. The first one pissed me off the most. I found Beatrice irritating in the first one. Mm-hmm. I found her irritating in the second one too, but I guess maybe I was invested. Mm-hmm. I think 4 is just a far better character, actually.
Yes.
Here's another thing that actually pissed me off about the series that isn't really... They kind of brushed over it in the movie. 4 finds out that he's not Divergent. Or is not necessarily pure. In the movie, they explain this, that the way he's been passing off as Divergent is because of brain elasticity. I don't know if that's the exact words it used, but brain elasticity is your brain's a way of developing in other ways to help you overcome pathologies or injuries or stuff like that. So, you know, if you wind up with some minimal brain damage because of a car accident, let's say, your brain, through brain elasticity, will actually help you find another way to function by using other parts of the brain to do the things that you may have lost due to that brain damage. So the explanation they give is that 4 has actually taught himself how to react in a divergent way without actually being genetically divergent. The problem I have with that is what the fuck? Now, it could be that I'm misremembering or misexplaining something about that, but the biggest problem I have with that is like, certainly your genetics do affect your personality and to some extent the way you think or the way you learn. So yes, but brain elasticity,
it's not.
I mean, that's essentially what the divergent genetics are doing. So like, I don't know.
'Cause they're supposed to be repairing the places that were broken by the genetic altering that
exactly
people did,
and so
right?
So altering your brain to get over the problem with your genetics is almost cooler. Like, it's far more important, because the idea here is are we trying to fix the genetics, or are we trying to fix the behavior that we fucked over? And I think when you get down to that point, it's splitting hairs. Like so for instance, the genetics of you and I, who happen to be born in the 90s, I'm hoping you were born in the 90s.
I was born in the 90s, yes.
So the genetics of people who were born in the 90s are ultimately going to be different from the genetics of people who were born 300 years ago. Yeah. Right? Not necessarily by a lot, but evolution is a continuous process. So, like, when we say Beatrice is 100% pure, I'm assuming it means she's not missing any particular connections or genes. Or, again, I'm not a scientist of genomes, right? Like, this isn't my field, not by a long shot, but from my colloquial understanding, or at least educated understanding in a passive sense, I think they're supposed to be like missing certain chromosomes or missing certain connections, like of their, but if you're able to overcome that through brain elasticity, through like changing your behavior, that seems to me like it would be the same goal. In a utilitarian sense, like in a purely, strictly pragmatic utilitarian sense, you've reached the same goal.
It just did it a different way.
You just did it a different way.
Yeah.
And I to me, it leaves me feeling like, so actually 4 is more exceptional. And not special,
Yes.
but exceptional. He managed to, like, figure this out, possibly subconsciously, but through his own, like, we might say, like, the trauma that he endured from his past neglect and abuse of whatever kind it was, he has managed to come up with systems that allow him to overcome certain restrictions that others have. That sounds to me like that behavior would then turn into, if he can teach those kinds of behaviors to others, would then turn into what we would call evolution, right? Behavior is part of evolution, and genetics are inherently tied to what behaviors and characteristics of your body become entrenched in your species. I understand that brain elasticity and genetics are very, very different, but I also, to me, it feels like we're splitting hairs in terms of the end goal here. Why is Beatrice still special, but 4 is not? Simply because he taught himself how to do the things that Beatrice can inherently do.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I guess I'm glad that I made 4 100% pure or whatever it is then, because...
See, I knew that was going to be
better.
the end goal. I knew that was going to be the end goal. Like this whole like Divergence pure thing, and so I just got rid of the whole... In my version, Divergent just meant you didn't conform to what the state wanted you to, right? And then I was just like, that's about as far as I'm going to go with that, because this whole idea of being genetically pure is bullshit.
Yes, it is. I mean, I guess it's like more genetically pure in lines with like humanity from like 250 years ago.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. Is like, what do you mean by, what does genetically pure even mean?
Because the people who are considered genetically pure in, you know, the present day of the Divergent world is like, they are different from the people who were considered genetically pure like 200 years before.
Well, they're different in terms of their gene makeup. The question is are we talking about people missing chromosomes, people missing genes, or are we just talking about
they never
like
really...
Yeah, or are we just talking about
really
like people people like oh, you're technically like full human? I don't know. Like, this is so strange to me. Like, I think the issue here is, and I'm going to leave it at here. I think the issue here is that I'm not a geneticist. I don't know enough about what the goal of this is, I guess. So that's all I'm going to say about that. I thought it was a little strange, but I would need to consult a geneticist to actually like figure it out.
Can I admit that if I was better at math, I'd probably have gone into the sciences for like biology and
that's dope.
Stuff like this, because I love reading up on it. Like, I'm always, and that's why I love like sci-fi and stuff, is because it usually plays around.
It usually plays, hard sci-fi does a lot of it. I was in the same boat actually. My spelling is terrible, like actually terrible, and if my spelling hadn't been awful, I would have probably pursued chemistry, because I really like chemistry. I'm quite good at the math. But one part of chemistry is called organic chemistry, and you have to be able to spell things like phenolphthalein, which I cannot do. I'm sure I could have like put my nose to the grindstone, but instead I went into music and philosophy. So
yes,
but yeah, at one point in time
happens.
I was like, I'm going to study
so
chemistry.
Yeah, I've always like, that's one of my favorite things. I've wanted to be like a marine biologist and do all those fun things and follow like the pathology of like different fish and stuff like that. Just seems like really cool to me. But at the same time,
pathologist, that'd be dope.
Yeah, but I can't do math, so I knew I was not gonna make it into any university level program for it.
We should get into pitches. Do you want to start with your pitch, or would you like me to start? How confident are you in your pitch?
I'm gonna start because I'm not that confident.
I actually am pretty confident in this. I think I've wrapped things up quite nicely.
Okay. Mine is, I start like super specific and then it gets more general as I go on, because I was just kind of like, I don't know specifics how to fix this problem. Oh no. Okay.
I'm sure I have plot holes in mine as well.
Should I do a recap? I've been doing a recap every time.
Yeah, do a quick recap.
Okay, so I have changed 4 to be female. She is also 100% Divergent along with Triss, and they are a couple, but it took a lot more of actual
it was way better,
emotional
way better
development
plot.
to get there.
Yeah, I shipped it way harder.
It just seemed more right. And then I've been kind of following different themes, sort of, and I kind of lost my theming for this pitch, but that's just my own fault. So the movie starts off basically like the next day after where the last movie ended. So they had just done, they just blew up the camel wall, or part of the camel wall.
Yeah.
People in the Erudite building have lost their memory, including Peter, and some other people who were out in the city in the zones where the gas got them. David is starting to get his military to get headed out, and Evelyn is also working to get their little military group heading out as well. So the movie starts with another message to the masses, I guess. From this time, it's Evelyn. It's just Evelyn and Joanna, and they're doing another, like, oh, we're working to do what we can, stay calm, meet us at these zones, like, trying to sort everyone out. And then as soon as the cameras are off, Joanna and Evelyn just go their separate ways, like, immediately. They're like, I don't even want to be near you, but, we're doing this leader thing together because our groups are still kind of not working together in the way that they should, and they need to see some unity, even though there isn't actual unity happening right now. So Joanna is trying to find more peaceful ways of avoiding conflict, or to earn their independence from, what is David's company called?
The Bureau of Genetic Rectifications. I just call them the Bureau.
The Bureau. So they're both working towards the goal of independence from the Bureau. Joanna has been trying to send out appeals to the council, as well as sending messages to David being like, hey, like, let's work this out. There's got to be a way to do this. Maybe, setting up some form of an agreement. I don't know. And Evelyn, on the other hand, is just getting ready to fight. She's been ready for war all her life, every day, all day, right? So they have different scouts going out. Some people are going to the settlements in the fringe, and saying like, hey, these people stole your children. Let's fight them. And so all of these people from the settlements are like, you know what? Yeah, sure. Some of them are like, we'll fight here. We'll get this whole place, like, we'll help you to map out the fringe so that you know how to get around. But we'll also, we'll fortify our areas so that you have a place to scout from. That'll give you a little bit more area so that you don't have to immediately go back to Chicago. And then some of the groups from the settlements are going back to Chicago and learning how to fight and getting weapons and getting suited up, all from Evelyn's group. And so it's only been 24 hours, but things are already moving and happening. And yeah, the thing that I have here is that I put down, for generations, the Bureau has toyed with the lives of the people living in Chicago. And then on the next page I have, for generations, the Bureau has been toying with the lives of these people in the settlements. So at one point, the council does get back in contact with Joanna, and says, your ancestors agreed to be a part of this. We can't step in because of this, I don't know what to call it, agreement, I guess. But if you believe, collectively as a city, that you can get things together, and that, you want to become an official, I don't know what to call it, city, settlement, something that's registered with the council, then here are the things that you need to get. And as soon as we get these, then we can intervene, we can stop the fighting. And so Joanna is like, all right, cool, I'll get right on it. So the things that she needs are basically like proof that they can establish an actual like society and that they can fend for themselves. So food, law, like all of the things that the faction system supported, as well as having at least one representative who is of quote-unquote genetic purity to go to the council. What is that city called?
Providence, Rhode Island.
Providence, thank you. To go to Providence to represent Chicago. And this was like the thing that they needed was at least one genetically pure person to represent them. That's like one of the things that Chicago's needed to become like a registered member of the council. I guess. I don't know. I'm just...
No, I like that. That works.
It works. Okay.
You can't be on the
Good to
council
know.
if you're not pure because we're a bunch of snobby asswipes.
Yep. And then they had a couple other things that they wanted, like coming up with an official currency as well to work within the city, but also that could be exchanged for the currency for like the general council. And so all of these things they needed to get like ASAP, get them all sorted out and ready. So Joanna is like, all right, I'm on it. I'm going to go talk with Evelyn. I'm going to go see if we can figure this out. You know, I'll get in contact with you again as soon as I can. So where am I? Oh yeah. And then the other thing was that they won't, not only will they gain, independence and protection from the council, but they may also be called upon later if another sort of battle war thing happens between other groups. So then they find out that it's not just Providence, the Bureau, and Chicago. There's also other cities out there that the council is, you know, keeping together and keeping safe. So one of the things that I really wanted to talk about with the council and Joanna is that there always has to be checks and balances and everyone needs to be kept accountable, so that, you know, we're not going to end up destroying what's left of humanity. They say, we want to step in, but we need you to be able to do this stuff so that we can, because, you know, we don't want to see people needlessly dying from either group, because again, there's not much left. So, while all that's going on, Triss, For, Christina, and Caleb are all trying to figure out where the heck they fit in everything. Triss, For, and Christina obviously would fight when the time came, but they also don't want to fight under Evelyn because they don't really support Evelyn's views on everything still. And Caleb and some of the other previous erudite people are working on seeing if they can get the effects of the memory gas reversed, but they're finding it to be a very difficult task. I think it would be funny to have a scene where Peter is just kind of sitting there and very confused and like, oh, like, are we friends? Were we friends when I could remember you? And Caleb is just like, something like that.
Yeah.
And then, what is this? So, David sends in troops before Joanna and Evelyn are actually ready to fight or ready to send their proofs into the council. And then all of a sudden, while the fight is just starting to happen, a whole bunch of David's people, like, revolt. They're like, no, never mind. We do not want to be a part of your bureau. Like, as we saw in the third movie, there were people who just didn't support David's way of doing things. Mm-hmm. And so all of a sudden, you know, Chicago's force has grown substantially because it was a lot of people from David's group who didn't want to be a part of David's group. And so David's group falls back a little bit. So they get a little bit more breathing time. All of a sudden, people of Chicago are like, okay, now what? Now we have all these people who came in from the fringe. And now we also have the people who left the Bureau. So they're struggling to figure out how to support everyone. And then, again, there were no details that I could come up with for this, but basically, Joanna and Evelyn actually make a split decision. They've got basically everything. Like, they've got an idea on how to do currency. They've got, they've agreed that they're going to do kind of like a reiterated version of the faction system, which I'll get to in a minute. And then they're like, well, who are we going to appoint? And they're like, well, the only two people that we know are like 100% pure are For and Triss. And so they're like, well, let's just appoint both of them for now, and we'll see if we can change it later. And so the council steps in again, just as David is about to go in with like a tank or something. I don't know. Where am I? Yeah, and so the council actually, not the council, but like the people who were sent by the council, a couple of people seek out Triss and For right off the bat, and they're just like, hey, you guys are the new reps, we're gonna show you what's up. And then both Triss and For are like, what? Who made this decision? And then all of a sudden everything is kind of like in limbo again, like, oh, are you guys the reps? Like, were you, like, this is a little sketchy. I feel like everything that I'm saying is just like,
No, you're good.
okay. Carry
on. I'm following.
Okay, I'm glad that you're following, because I can't even follow myself sometimes. So yeah, so for a while, for the past few movies, people have been telling Triss and For, like, oh, you need to be in some sort of a position of power because you guys would do great at it. And then finally, I guess they're in that position of power, thrown there by people who have been telling them forever that they need to be in this position. But it's kind of like, it's like a watered down version of power, because they're just going to be representing Chicago. So they're like, so okay, well, we can power, yeah, we can work with this, right? So basically, I wanted it to be that there's still, it's like this sort of feeling of like relief at the end of the battle, where it's like, okay, things are over, we need to get sorted out, but we have support now from the council. Like, we know that we can count on them to keep us safe if we really need it.
Yeah.
And Joanna and Evelyn, over the course of the movie, have actually been like growing closer together as they figure out, like, oh, they're actually, you know, their goal is still the same. They just need to figure out how to compromise in a way that it will work for them together. Yeah. So then they become, they like reestablish their council that they used to have, as well as the faction system. And instead of having 5 factions, they have 6. And going, like, switching factions is not looked down upon anymore. Whether it's for your choosing ceremony or whether it's, 10 years down the line. Their testing is not based off of genetics anymore. It's more like, what do you want to do? And the people who consider themselves factionless are more like floaters. They go where they need to be. Yeah. Where, like, oh, we're lacking some manpower right now in farming. So, like, they go and help out in farming. And so that would be like, that's the 6th faction. Yeah. And then,
although floaters doesn't sound like a great faction name.
No, I couldn't come up with a good name for them. But I wanted it to be a happy ending despite all of the hard work ahead of everyone. Really.
It has to be like hopeful, but yeah.
It has to be hopeful, but it still has to be like, oh my god, now we have this huge mountain again to scale.
I think it's interesting that you choose to go back to the faction system, or at least a version of it. Although it's much different, like, people are allowed to change, so it's not like you're open. Yeah, it's no longer like Faction Before Blood. It's much more just like these are the structures that are used, like much what I said in my analysis of the first movie, where I was like, you need some kind of state, government or governing body in order to run things, and that's essentially what this has become.
And then, at the end of Harry Potter where they have that scene of like 15 years later or 10 years later or whatever it is.
It's 19
I thought that would be
years
really
later.
nice to have. It was 19, that's right. I thought that would be really nice to have, where we see Chicago as a new society, like, 10, 15 years later. And we see Four and Triss, and they're grown, and they're actually, like, diplomatic, and they know how to handle themselves.
Instead of just being a bunch of whiny fucking teenagers.
Yeah. And, what was the other one? Oh, and they never actually did find a way to reverse the memory thing. So instead, we see Peter as a nice man who is helping out society instead of just being opportunistic, because that really made me sad.
Yeah. Yeah.
But he's also just like, he's like overly friendly now. It's like his personality has changed
yeah.
because he just didn't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad yours turned out happy, because I hope you like Heartbreak.
Oh no.
Are you ready for
I like
this?
Heartbreak, but I don't know if I
Are you
like
ready for
Heartbreak.
this?
Yes.
Okay, so in mine we found out that the basically my theme has been we're always dealing with like what are the means of controlling people in terms of government, and mine has always been like the use of the proletariat or soldiers in order to uprise against the upper class. But the proletariat is basically just a tool, so these soldiers are tools. We found out that the Bureau is actually nothing to do with genetics. It's all more about they're running tests for like years and years. They've been running tests to see how the city of Chicago would work under, and using the city of Chicago and its citizens to see how they react during uprisings or coups or jury or like different governing systems, like what works to control their thoughts and how people are governed as like this small little society. And then every couple of years they've been sending in someone to like insert new memories and like start a new system, and that was Beatrice's mom. And actually like the city that they know hasn't been 200 years old. It's only been about 30 years of this present experiment, and this has been going on for like hundreds of years. So this movie opens up. Also, Beatrice was taken away to be tortured. I don't know if you guys remember that. And Four is back to the city. Like, they did not get along with each other at the end.
Right.
So the movie opens up and we're back in Chicago, and there's a bunch of hollow screens like we saw at the beginning of the other movies, and Beatrice is giving a kind of propaganda speech. She basically says the purpose of the citizens of the city was to be studied on how to govern and control human through information and thinking, and how they would react to fighting. So in the time that she's been gone, this is a couple weeks after the end of the last movie. In the time that she's been gone, she's come to learn and think that this is actually really important work that must continue. On top of all the data that they're using, like the Bureau is getting due to the fighting, on top of that, all the data that they're getting from them fighting the Bureau, like all the data from their brain, this is still great. Like, it's still useful. But if you surrender, then less people will have to lose their lives on both sides. And either way, the Bureau's still going to beat you. Like, you're just outgunned and outmanned. Like, there's nothing you can do. Like, you might as well, all that'll happen is you get your memories wiped and we'll be able to continue the tests, as opposed to a bunch of people dying on both sides. Then the Bureau wins and we do the tests anyway. And Four is basically, he's back in the city. He's like, yo, this is bullshit. I can't believe Beatrice is saying something like that. He arrives at a meeting to discuss the plan with Evelyn and Joanna and a couple other people that are there. So Joanna she thinks that peace might be a better because it'll keep people from dying. But Four is like, nah, man, having your memory wiped is basically murder anyway, because you won't remember who you are. Like, who you are as a person is gone. So sure, your heart is beating, but it's not really your heart anymore. It's just the body's heart. Like, it's none of your memories. You're not even the same person. It wouldn't be like you would be Joanna. You'd have a new name, a new life. You're not you. So it's tantamount to murder anyway. But like Four knows that he's like, look, there is an option. Some of the people in the army that were in the Bureau, their memory was wiped. and they don't know they're being controlled, but that's an option. We could figure this out. If we could have someone like Caleb or figure out how to reverse the memory serum, we could bring those people back, and they could be like, oh shit, like the Bureau is actually not good and we're fighting for them. So we could have an uprise. But just then, Caleb interrupts the meeting, and everyone's like, what do you want, Caleb? Like, we're busy having a government meeting. And Caleb's like, yo, I thought there was something off about Beatrice's face. So I went back to Erudite, and I found out that there was something off. It's actually like a facial reconstruction software and voiceover to make a fake Beatrice. That's not Beatrice giving that speech. And Caleb is like, that's great. Like, she doesn't believe those things. But 4 is like, well, before I at least knew she was alive. Now I don't even know that because that's a fake Beatrice. So they're like, okay, we like the whole Evelyn 4 and Joanna are like, well, this is a good option. Let's send a group of people in to go and infiltrate the Bureau and see what we can do about convincing them. And while we're doing that, we'll have our scientists here see if we can reverse the effects of the memory. But 4 is like, no, man, I want to be the one to go to the Bureau. I want to find Beatrice, but also I want to convince the guards because I got to know some of them, and I also know my way around. So he goes out after them, and when he does this, he sort of like half kidnaps Caleb. He's like, I need your help, Caleb. And Caleb's like, what the heck, man? I was gonna reverse the serum, and he's like, no, you got to come with me. So meanwhile, Beatrice is being held captive. They have been using the same setup that Janine used to torture her back in the second movie through all the serums. And this has been going on for several days. So David assures, like weeks, in fact. David assures her that like the data they're getting is great. Like they're doing like psychological and physical torture using these serums. And it's like, they're like, this is great. Like we can do this for years as long as we keep you alive. They just basically do the minimum. So in the city, the first skirmish is fought. With the Bureau outside the city walls, and the city actually seems to be holding their own. So they're like, this is actually a win for us. We're actually like holding our own against this, technological giant. But then they start to notice that the soldiers that they're killing from the other side are actually part of the crew that they sent out to infiltrate the Bureau. They had been captured, had their memories wiped, and are now working as soldiers and don't remember coming from the city.
Right.
And so they're basically the people in the city are killing other people in the city. So the Bureau's using their enemy soldiers against them. Meanwhile, on the outskirts, 4 and Caleb, basically they find a dead soldier with some of the gas on them, and they don't have a lot of equipment, but Caleb is like, okay, like let me see what I can do with this now that I have some of the memory and some of the data that we had back from the city. So he manages to create kind of a prevention. It's not a cure. He's like, I don't have enough time or facilities to do this. But what it will do is it'll stop somebody who's taken it from having their memory wiped. So when you've taken this new serum, you can't have your memory wiped. So 4 gets captured on purpose and infiltrates the team. He undergoes testing where he gets like his memory wiped, and then he finds out that actually before they have their memory wiped, they're sterilized. The sterilization wasn't caused by the war. It's something that David has been using on the soldiers to keep them from multiplying so that he can control how many soldiers he has at once so they won't overpower him, but also so they'll focus on fighting instead of on family.
Yeah.
And then they have their memory wipes so that they don't remember being sterilized, right? So, But in order to go through with it, 4 has to become sterilized and then gets his memory wiped. Sort of. Doesn't actually get his memory wiped. So he's like super upset that he's sterilized, but he's like, I got to do this for the greater good, right?
Yeah.
So then he's like, okay, so I originally wanted to go after Beatrice, but he's like, I know that for the success of the city and for everyone here, it's actually more important that I focus on telling these people what's been going on. So he focuses on telling the soldiers. Back to David decides that they need to try a different kind of stimulus. He's like, we're going to try a different kind of torture on Beatrice. And he reveals that they've actually also created they want more of a psychological response now. So they've created a different kind of serum, one that they actually will wipe out the memories of only specific parts. And so they tell Beatrice they're going to wipe her memories, but only of her memories of 4.
Oh, no.
Yeah. So then 4 winds up drawing a bit too much attention to himself while he's trying to like disseminate information on the Bureau. And he catches the eye of one of the superior officers, who just so happens to be Peter, who has found his way back into the Bureau. So Peter's like, I wonder if 4 has truly had his memory wiped. So he pulls out a now captured Caleb. And 4 is like, oh shit, but he can't react. Right? He can't react. And so Peter's like, I wonder what you'll do if we wipe his memory. And so he like waits for 4 to flinch or whatever. And 4 watches as Caleb gets his memory wiped. But he doesn't react.
Yeah.
So that night, after that whole thing, that night, 4 decides to make a huge scene. He's like, that's it. Like, I've got enough people on my side, I think. So he makes a big scene, and Peter comes down, and the two of them fight in earnest. But Peter actually cheats, and he's basically, like, defeats 4. And he's like, it doesn't even matter. Like, none of this matters, but I just really wanted to kill you. But 4 is like, no. I got all the information I wanted about being memories being wiped, and about how the sterilization was actually a tactic used by the Bureau to keep the army controlled. And just the way that they keep the experiments in the city controlled. They're in the same boat. They're basically the same kind of people. They're just being used as different tools. And secondly, the whole scene that he made, was actually a distraction, because Caleb had taken the preventative memory wipe. So when he got his memory wiped, he wasn't actually getting his memory wiped. Then we cut to Caleb, who is not memory wiped, and he is actually looking for Beatrice. So Beatrice is in her cell, and she's slowly she's like freaking out, like psychologically, because she can feel herself forgetting 4.
Mm-hmm.
And then like bit by bit, and this is causing her like massive psychological trauma. So finally, all of a sudden, Caleb shows up, and he even punches David in the face.
Nice.
And then like pulls Beatrice out of the torture device and asks if she's okay. But she's like, she's physically fine, but she's like, the memory torture has like really fucked her up, and so she's like weak psychologically, and she feels sluggish and slow. And we can do some really cool visual things with this, like these movies have been doing visual camera tricks.
Yep.
And we see a lot of those, like mirror shots and whatnot. So she keeps feeling slow and strange, and the camera does those wonky moves. But she's physically well, and the two of them are able to like fight their way out. And they hide like in a room during a lull in the fight. They hide in a room, and Caleb she's like, "How did you find me?" And Caleb explains like, 4 had this plan to do all this, and Beatrice is like, "Oh, that's great, but who's 4?"
Yeah.
And Caleb is like, Tobias, and Beatrice is like, I have no idea who you're talking about, but if they saved me, that's awesome. And Caleb is like, what the fuck? So they manage to like fight more, and they commandeer a ship, and Beatrice looks at herself in the reflection, and it's like she keeps doing this like phasing thing, like where it's mirrors and whatnot, and it's like all wonky. And so she's like, oh, I feel sluggish and slow, and she's like, after all the fighting, like I think I'm just like exhausted. And he's like, well, maybe 4, like seeing 4, and she's like, I don't know who this is. She closes her eyes for a second, and she feels like she's diving into water, and then she opens them again and sees that Caleb has gone missing. Like from she's in a cockpit of a ship, and Caleb's now missing. And all of a sudden a message, so then we flip to Peter and David, and David is like, we have to get her back, and Peter's like, yo, I got a plan, don't even worry about it. And a hologram appears on the ship as Triss is driving away. And Peter basically says, hey, Beatrice, like, you have a choice. You can basically return with no fuss or muss. Otherwise, if you don't, we'll just kill 4. And David is like, no, you're an idiot. She doesn't know who 4 is anymore. And Peter's like, well, that makes things easier. And Beatrice watches as Peter shoots 4 in the back of the head.
Oh, no.
Yeah, and she's like, so we can see in her reaction, she doesn't know who 4 is, but she's upset that somebody has died. So she's like, oh, I can't believe you killed a person, but she has no idea who 4 is.
Yeah.
So then Peter's like, okay, let's try that again. And he brings Caleb out. Somehow Caleb was captured as she was like incapacitated because her brain is so fucked up. And she's like, this is weird. So Peter points the gun to the back of Caleb's head, and Beatrice watches, but she like watches carefully, and then Caleb gets shot too. But instead of freaking out, Beatrice is like super calm, and she's like, She looks at her reflection of the windshield, and then she unbuckles her seatbelt and steps through the windshield.
Okay.
Like, as though it's a mirror. And then she wakes up, and she's back in the simulation from the Bureau.
Oh.
So all of that was actually her just being tortured.
Right.
And then and we see David is super agitated because, like, somehow she discovered that she was in the simulation. But I'm pleased with the kind of trauma that, like, we got a lot of psychological trauma out of that because she thought she was forgetting. That was massive amounts of trauma. And then watching 4, like, her struggle with the fact that she didn't think she knew 4. So, like, he's like, the data is really, really interesting. And 4 is also ecstatic to Beatrice is ecstatic to find out that she remembers who 4 is. That just then, there's a break-in in her cell, and it's not Caleb, and it's not 4, it's the Bureau soldiers who've decided that they want peace, and they've started to revolt against the Bureau, and they're being led by and helped by Caleb, who immediately pulls Triss out of the machine, and she's like, is it really you? And he's like, yeah, why, what do you mean? And she's like, why, and this is sort of his redemption. I wanted him to have a redemption, because he really kind of fucked her over in the first and the second. So now he's got a redemption. And so then Beatrice and 4 can finally meet each other for the first time, and she's like super happy because she hasn't forgotten him, but also like they argued in the last movie, so like this is sort of a reconciliation for them. So it's been a few days, and Beatrice and 4 are back in the city. Evelyn and Joanna are still in charge, much the way like you had. They want to have a trial for all the people in the Bureau, but Evelyn wants to wipe their minds so they can be controlled. Joanna wants a fair trial and is pushing for peace, which most people agree on. They all want peace, but under what circumstances? So we can see that Evelyn seems to be losing popularity. She wants more of like a strict control, and she has a few devoted followers, but Joanna's push for peace is gaining much more confidence. So in a gambit, Evelyn asks 4 to take over for her because he's more popular, and then people will listen to her ideas. But 4 is like, I'm not interested in becoming your puppet. Like, it's not what I want. I'm not even interested in politics. What I want to do is try to deal with my own psychological trauma from all like the abuse and everything, and being a soldier and whatnot, plus the fact that I can't have children anymore. And try to like deal with that. And I just don't want to be a soldier. Like, I just want to be a person, a citizen, right? So at the trial for David and Peter, Beatrice basically, she talks to the whole city, and she's just like, everyone. So there's some people from the Outlands, the outskirts that are there. There's some former soldiers from the Bureau and people from the city. And she basically says, I'm not going to tell you what you should do during this trial. I'm not going to tell you how to vote, because we've for too long been told by other structures or things how to think and how to do things. And I don't want to do that. So I'm not going to tell you what to do. But I will say, I believe in justice, and I believe in the value of like a human life, and I think that should be held with the highest respect, because that freedom of choice and the freedom to live the way you want was never given to us, right? We were always controlled. So when we vote, I'm not saying that we should vote to let them go free. They need to be punished, but I'm also saying that like killing them will take away their life, and then they don't have the same kind of control that we had, and we should still be compassionate because we're better than they are.
Yeah.
And that's the end of Ascendant.
I like that. Yeah. I like that a lot.
I contemplated just having like a really, really dark ending, but I thought one of the things that this movie series has done a lot of has been playing with those camera angles. And so the entire time I was like, well, what if instead of setting up all the serums and like all the camera angles and weird shit that's been going on, let's use those 3 previous movies as the setup, and then basically be like, have like that one reveal where like, if you've been paying attention, you should have been able to see what is real and what is not. And then in this movie, we don't give it any pretext because you should have been paying attention to the other movies. And that's why we have this reveal at the end where Beatrice stands up and walks through the cockpit windshield. And I just think visually that'd be really cool. And if you're paying attention, you'd be like, oh, I get what's going on. But if you're not paying attention, you'd be like, oh my God, it was all a simulation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like the idea of like all the visuals and stuff that you were describing.
Yeah. Try to keep it in that same kind of, because these movies have done some really cool stuff with that.
Yeah. I don't know where I would include any crazy visuals in mine.
Well, maybe I would keep them subtle. I would keep them subtle in this movie until it was like important to reveal it, because you want it to be like, yo, this is weird. Is this just Beatrice's psychological trauma, or is it like if you know if you know what to look for, you'd be like, oh, I think that she's in a simulation. But like, it could also be Beatrice's psychological trauma from like all the stuff that they just done to her. The other thing that I tried to do is split the movie between like the first half is 4 and the second half is Beatrice.
Yeah.
And have like the story kind of split that way, because I really do think this series should have 2 main characters, not 1. And I think it kind of does. It just doesn't all the time. It only does when it wants to. Yeah. And so yeah, I really wanted to focus on like this whole idea of how to control people's thoughts, and like, so through the use of the movie, we're getting a little meta here. Through the use of the movie, I've tried to like use visual metaphors to control, like through the camera angles and whatnot, and through the setup to control what people are thinking. Mm-hmm. Like having you think that this is actually happening when it's not. The same way that propaganda gets used to make you think what you think is happening. Yep. Anyway, I don't know.
Which is what you've been pushing a lot.
Propaganda. How to control what people are thinking, how to control people. Which is why I really wanted to have like Beatrice give a speech. Well, she's not in politics, but she gives a speech about how the trials should work. Yeah. And that's why I wanted to end with that. And the 2 of them are together, Foreign and Beatrice. What did you think of writing without, like, having to finish the whole series, but without having any source material?
It was really tough because, like I said, like I couldn't think of any details to put in, and I couldn't think like visually what it would all look like. Yeah, you know, I think at this point we would see Providence when
we saw parts of Providence in the last movie.
But I didn't have anything of Providence in the third movie, right? So at that point, I guess that would be the cool visual thing, is going to Providence. But like, it was really difficult because I didn't have any visuals to go off of, and I didn't have any of the details ironed out because there were no details that I could borrow from like a movie. Yeah. So
and I know that for me it was like, I never knew where I only wanted to end it similarly to how the movie was ending, because I wasn't sure where the next movie was going to take it. Mm-hmm. Whereas on this one, it was sort of like, okay, I know how the last movie ended, but where do I want to end this so before I had started writing, I was like, oh my God, like I'm having a bit of paralysis, because I was like, I don't know where to go. I don't have any source material. I only remember what happened in the third book, and only vaguely, and I don't want to do that. But then once I started writing, I found an enormous amount of freedom. I was like, well, we know these characters, we know what they do, I sort of know each character's kind of arc, where I want them to go, and so that's what I wanted to do with them. Like, I wanted Peter to get his comeuppance, I wanted Beatrice and Four to reconcile, I really wanted Caleb to actually have more of an arc, and I knew that I wanted to split my time between Four and Beatrice in terms of who was talking. So I found a lot of freedom in this, but it was difficult. I was like, how do I tie in all of my themes and character arcs? It was incredibly difficult without having something to pitch. So mad respect to anyone who's a screenwriter, because making a movie is hard. Yeah. I guess the other thing that I had a really hard time with was continuing the trends that I had in the first 3, where like I really focused on the communication between Four and Triss, and I didn't have any idea on how to keep going with that this one. I just knew, okay, I wanted them in the end to be like in Providence. They're like, you know, representing Chicago, because that's what they can do. That's what's best for them and for Chicago. But I like had no idea. I was like, I don't know. There's no specifics here. They're together. They like each other still. Is there anything about all of your pitches that you would have liked to have changed? Like now that we're like 4 movies in and you've written your pitch for all 4, is there anything that you'd be like, I really wish I had done this, or not done this?
I wish that I did more with Christina earlier in the movies.
Yeah, she's unfortunately a hard character to do anything with. She doesn't really have an arc other than like Beatrice's friend. Yeah. Which is, again, you know, that whole thing, everything is focused on Beatrice. I would have liked, upon reflection, I could have kept my story exactly the same and made made Four a female the way that you did. And I kind of think that would have been really awesome. Yeah, I think if we put our 2 pitches together, it would have been, and like ship, and because I definitely do think I don't ship Four and Beatrice enough in mine. Like I want them to, especially because at the end of the third movie, having them like fight and then reconcile at the end. Oh, that would be amazing. And then I would have also loved to have a scene in there. I didn't really think about it, but having a scene in there where like 4 has to come to grips with the fact that she in this new version, that she is sterile. She had to give that up in order to find out the truth, but in order to infiltrate the bureau, she had to. And like the kind of, I don't know, that's a whole movie right there if you wanted to have a fifth, but I don't. But yeah, pretty crazy. Any last minute thoughts about the whole Divergent series now that we're all done, or just this pitch in general?
I'm never gonna watch these movies again.
Yeah, I have the very much the same feeling. I'm very proud of both of our pitches. I think there was some great ideas in there.
Definitely.
And as far as pitches goes, like a pitch should just be something that you put together like with a rough sketch. Like these are not screenplays by any means. Like these are just some ideas that we had in order to wrap things up. So no criticism towards any screenwriters or authors out there. This is including
just ideas.
It's just ideas and themes that we were like, hey, this is what I latched onto. Yeah, I don't have any thoughts either. Unfortunately, I think there are some great ideas in these movies that were maybe not explored to the fullest of their extents. But I had
like I said, there was a lack of research for some things.
Yeah, and maybe a lack of foresight or thought into how some things would affect the plot. And why. But again, these are just all our reader interpretation. Like if you like these books or these movies, great. If you liked our pitches, awesome. If you didn't like our pitches, tell us why. Because that's just good analytical thinking. And of course, we want different opinions. I liked doing the series. I kind of want to do it again, but maybe not for a little while.
Yes.
A lot of work.
It was a lot of work and a lot of like thinking. I don't know. I'm going into school tomorrow and now I have to, refresh my brain tonight, I guess.
Yeah. There's a lot of like, I was almost like pre-planning, but also remembering at the same time. Like you have to remember what you wrote, but you have to plan for what you think might come ahead.
Yes.
Ooh,
it is tough.
difficult.
Well, I don't know if I'll do like a large series like this, like four books.
I don't know. I'm feeling Twilight next.
Oh no! But that one's 5 movies, isn't it?
Yeah, we'll see what happens there. We'll see if that one even happens. Where can people find you?
You can find me on twitch.tv/AlyssaLou, ALYSSALOOO, or on Instagram at Alyssa Rose Handmade, where I show off all my handmade stuff.
You can find Alyssa and I, my and Alyssa's band called Robot Philosopher anywhere you listen to dope music, including right here on YouTube. You can also find more episodes, including the rest of the series if you missed it, the rest of this Divergent series, and more episodes of this podcast and other cool shows right here on CineMasters Ultimate Timeline. Take it easy.
Bye.